Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to church this morning.
Come on, Ian.
Hopefully Scotty's managed to email out you the lesson.
Yes.
But if you don't, it's okay, because we're going to be stuck in... Not stuck's not the right word, is it? We're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 1.
Let's go, Ian.
So if you can turn to there. The title of my lesson today is A Mother Who Changed the World.
Come on.
Let's go.
Come on.
Scotty asked me last night, went for dinner last night, what's your title of your lesson tomorrow? And I thought, actually I don't have a title yet, I better think of a good one. Yes, it is Mother's Day. And unfortunately my mum's not here today, but my father is here today. And my father Malcolm, he's been an incredible support, as has my mum all of my life, and that still continues. So if I am the dad of the church, please meet your granddad of the church. Of course, so next to him is my wife Margot.
Come on, Margot.
Who has a selflessness that I do not have. A joy, a creativeness, and an enthusiasm for life that thankfully has rubbed off on her daughters.
Nice.
She has the incredible ability to still be excited a few years ago when she was handed her 6th best mum ever mug. That is an incredible ability to be able to do that. We're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to do quite a deep Bible study today. Now, I have limited time, so I've got to get into it.
Let's go, Ian.
But I'm going to go over the background of what's happening in this situation. We're going to be talking about a mother called Hannah. It has been a little bit of confusion in my house this week, because every time the word Hannah was mentioned, I never know whether Margot was talking about my lesson or about my daughter. And I got it wrong a couple of times. You know, the world in which Hannah lived was not a great time for the nation of Israel. You don't need to turn there, but in Exodus 19 it says, and this is when the Israelites were getting the 10 Commandments. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you'll be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you'll be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You know, Israel was supposed to be a holy nation, a nation set apart, a nation that all the other nations could look at and go, wow, I want something that they have. That's what they were supposed to be. You know, when we read, and we read it a lot, Acts chapter 2, between verses 42 and 47, we look at that, well, I look at that and go, I want to be part of that.
Yeah, let's go, Ian.
So what happened in the Old Testament, people looking to the nation of Israel, is supposed to be what's happening with us as God's church here on this planet. But in the last words in the book before we're talking about, 1 Samuel 1, in the last words in the book before that, Judges, it says, in those days Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. It tells us that they were not a kingdom of priests that were working together anymore for the glory of God. And as an example, the chief priest of that day in Hannah's time, and we'll talk about him soon, his name was Eli. He had 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and they were both priests. And while Eli was a good man in the sight of man, his sons were not. It reads in 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 22. Now Eli, who was very old, heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they slept with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So he said to them, why do you do such things? I hear from all people about these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, the report I hear spreading among the Lord's people is not good. If one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? His sons, however, did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. You know, we can't read this passage, if we think about it, without thinking, what the heck is going on here? 2 of the senior priests in the nation of Israel are sleeping with basically temple or shrine prostitutes outside the tent of meeting or the tabernacle. That is supposed to be the place where God resides. And they were sleeping with prostitutes at the gate of that place. Wow. 2 of the senior priests. You know, we have to look at that and think, what the heck is going on? Israel was supposed to be a nation that all the other nations looked to. They looked at their justice, they looked at their love, they looked at their relationship with God and go, I want to see that. But what had happened is that Israel had turned into a nation that was like all the others that were around it. They were like all the other nations that worshipped the gods of Baal, Asherah, Dagon, and Molech. Because those are the activities that those people did. And this is the backdrop of the story that we read. Point number 1. What road are you on? 1 Samuel chapter 1 verses 1 to 7.
Let's go in.
There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. I knew I should have practiced that a little bit more. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to his wife Peninnah and to his sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double proportion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. So here we have a man called Elkanah, and his first wife, I assume, is Hannah. But she is barren. She is unable to have children. But to make sure that his family line continued, to make sure that he had children to work their plot of land when he got older, he married a second woman, Peninnah. So we have this situation. We have Hannah, who is told by Elkanah that she was loved. So we have to assume that Peninnah was not told that she was loved by Elkanah. We have Hannah, who in the eyes of Elkanah is number 1 in his life, but society, because Peninnah has the children, is recognized as the number 1. We're told that Hannah receives a double portion, but that should actually really go to Peninnah, because she is the one, through her line, Elkanah's lineage will continue. To me, this sounds like a bit of a recipe for disaster. Neither Hannah nor Peninnah wanted to be in the situation that they are. I'm sure Hannah was grateful for being loved, but she really wanted children. I'm sure Peninnah was grateful that she had children, but she wanted to be loved. None of them were where they wanted to be. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but when I go to a shopping mall with my wife always seems to know where to go. Funny that. When I go to a shopping mall, I always have to go to the electronic board and find out where the shop that I want to go is. And what that shopping board, that board tells you is where you are and where you want to go. Well, isn't life that like that sometimes? We never seem to be where we want to go. Now, the interesting thing about shopping malls, and when you go to shops, sometimes you get there and you think, actually, I don't want to be here anyway. They don't have what I want. Life throws up challenges, and it has here for Peninnah. I know we're going to talk about Hannah, we'll get to her at the moment. I think that she is actually bitter because she doesn't feel loved. And she's taken out the easy road with her bitterness. It says here, or the easy target, she takes Hannah as the target. And then the Bible says they are rivals. Think about that. They are rivals. I think that Peninnah was thinking, I am not loved because of that woman. I have done everything I should have done as a wife in terms of bearing children for my husband, but I'm still considered an outsider. My life is miserable, therefore I'm going to make her life miserable. It's all of her fault. Based on this, Peninnah decides a course of action. Her life is miserable, so she's going to make Hannah's miserable. She knows who to blame for her situation, so she's going to blame her. So she taunts and provokes Hannah until Hannah herself is miserable. Hannah doesn't take that easy road, she takes a hard road. She doesn't seek revenge. She goes to God instead. It says in the scripture she goes up to Shiloh, this town Shiloh. Now Shiloh is the place where the Israelites keep the tabernacle. Now this is what they built at Mount Sinai when they came out of Egypt, and when they moved to Israel it came with them, and it is at Shiloh. So this is where the presence of God is supposed to be.
Right.
Now as a woman she doesn't have to go up to Shiloh. It's not necessarily her role, it's the men's role to do that. But she knows if there is anywhere, any place, any time that God is going to hear my prayer to have children, it's going to be in Shiloh outside the tabernacle.
Come on, Ian.
I don't know how you're feeling today. If you feel that you are exactly where you want to be in life. Margot and I yesterday, we were having a coffee together, and we were supposed to be helping the people doing the barbecue, but they did such a great job. You guys were awesome yesterday. They had everything under control. We felt a bit superfluous, which is a good thing, which means that you've been trained very well.
Nice.
But when we were in this coffee shop, we met this guy who's 32, who is a New Zealander, but he's lived in London and he's travelled around a lot. And we were talking to him, and he didn't know where he wants to be in life. He didn't know if he should be living here in New Zealand because it was his homeland, especially because he bought a breakfast and a coffee and it cost him $40. I'm sure you can relate to those sort of things. He didn't know if he should live in Australia because it's bigger and a lot exciting. He actually has an Irish passport so he can live in London. And he is actually thinking, maybe I should live in Portugal, in Lisbon, because it's a very happening place for his area of business. You know, so there are so many times in life where we just don't know if we are where we should be. So I just want to ask you the question today, or tell you, if you don't think you are where you should be in life, make sure you talk to someone about it today. Whether there's things on your heart you need to talk about, or just where you're going in life. If you aren't where you want to be, life is too short to spend years and years in the same place. I remember so clearly a conversation that I had with my dad. I'd finished university and I'd worked for this company for 4.5 years. And the first couple of years went great, but then it sort of got worse and worse and worse. And I'm the sort of person, I'll persevere and persevere and persevere, hope that things will get better. And I remember Dad one Christmas asking me, he said, "Are you happy working where you are?" I think he knew the answer. And I said, "You know what, Dad? No, I'm not. In fact, I haven't really been happy for the last 4.5 years." It wasn't until someone asked me the question, could I actually admit to myself what was really going on in my heart. Point 2.
Come on, Ian.
What's your prayer life like? 1 Samuel chapter 1, let's carry on, verse 8 through to verse 15. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Once when they'd finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant as a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of great anguish and grief." Hannah is in distress, so much distress. And I think at times in our lives we all go through these points where we feel incredibly distressed. And I think there's 3 reasons for that. One is penina. To be around someone that's always pulling you down, that's trying to discourage you, just wears you down and out. The second is Elkanah. While the Bible tells us here that he gives her extra food, I think he's incredibly ineffective at comforting her. He says, "Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" The thing with Elkanah is that he doesn't have to worry about life anymore. His second wife has already given him children. His lineage is going to continue. And as a result, he doesn't feel her pain the way she feels her pain. It becomes all about him, not about her and her struggles. There is a hole in her heart and he doesn't realize that he can't fill it. But third, I think those stresses are secondary to the stress that Hannah is feeling for not being close to God. In Psalm 62:8 it says, "Trust in Him, God, at all times, you people. Pour your hearts to Him, for God is our refuge." Hannah wants to trust God with all of her heart, at all of the time. That's why she travels to Shiloh once or twice a year, because she is pouring her heart out to God year after year after year. And persevering in such a way that we're told about, that Jesus tells us about in Luke 9, chapter 9, verses 1 to 9. You can look at that later. And yet God, at this point in her life, does not feel like her refuge. She prays from her heart, not just words, but from her heart. But God still feels distant. You know, prayer is actually quite a hard thing to do in life. Sometimes it seems great. I think when I was a young Christian, prayer was awesome. I loved it. It was fantastic. I remember we used to have leaders meetings once a week, and they would finish about 10 o'clock at night, and I would walk home from leaders, this is when I was in London, from leaders meeting to my house. It was a 3-hour walk, and I would pray the whole time. I remember those days. I was physically and emotionally shattered by the time I got home. But I look back and what a special time. We can find prayer unnatural. We're talking to someone we can't see, touch, taste, or smell. It can feel a little bit weird. But I think in my stage at life, when I get a little bit older, it also is difficult and challenging because sometimes I feel that God just hasn't answered my prayers. I feel that I've lost the actual connection between me and God. Our prayer life, in my opinion, shows us what our relationship with God is really like. If you have a great prayer life, if you're battling with God in terms of your struggles and your difficulties and your worries, and you're also praising Him and worshiping Him, you've got a great prayer life. Yeah. If you're not doing those things, you don't have a great relationship with God at the moment. Yeah. And Jesus imitates this for us. In Hebrews chapter 5 verse 7 it says, "During the day of Jesus' life on earth, He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save Him from death. And He was heard because of His reverent submission." Jesus had a very healthy relationship with God. And His prayer life was dynamic and emotional. If religion today seems more academic and distant, then look at your prayer life. Change your prayer life and you'll change your relationship with God. My wife gave me one challenge at the beginning of the year when we were talking about our goals. And her challenge was, I'm naturally a bit reserved, a bit quiet. I don't talk about all the things that I should talk about. And her one challenge was that I needed to, in her words, overshare.
Come on, honey. Let's go, Margot.
As my level of communication in our relationship can be less than healthy for the relationship. And what is the result of not talking enough? Of not sharing enough? You can ask Margot, but in a relationship, I think that without dynamic conversation, a relationship can become stale and boring, and ultimately, and especially with God, ultimately unfulfilling.
Come on, you.
If you feel that your relationship with God at the moment is a bit unfulfilling, you need to see and talk about how you communicate with Him. Point 3, the right word.
Come on, Ian.
Actually, one thing I was going to say just before that. Prayer is something that, yes, it's very personal with God. But in the Bible, if you have a look at prayer, people were praying together all the time.
Yeah.
Prayer was a community activity as much, if not more, than a personal activity. If you're finding it hard to change your prayer life by yourself, you have to do it with other people.
Yeah.
You have to. It will not work by yourself. Point 3, the right word.
Come on.
There are so many times in my life, and I would say hundreds, not dozens, but hundreds, where I've had a conversation with someone. Maybe it's been an argument or a disagreement, or I'm trying to get a view across, or I'm trying to convince my bosses about something, that after the conversation, when I go home, I go, why didn't I say that? I'm very good at remembering things that I should have said later, and not good at the moment. You know, there is often a perfect thing to say in each situation. Sadly, I do not have that skill. I remember when I was living in Australia, and we lived in Australia for 20 years, there was a TV host personality. His name is Andrew Denton. If you know Australian culture quite well, you'll know who he is. And he had this series where he interviewed people, which was quite famous. Now, hands up if you know who Steve Waugh is. 2 people. Okay, I've got a bit of work to do here. Okay. All right. Steve Waugh is arguably the best cricket captain that Australia has ever had. He has the highest winning percentage as a cricket captain in the history of cricket, in the history of the world. No one in world cricket has a higher winning percentage as a cricket captain as Steve Waugh. He played for Australia for 19 years, over 300 games.
Wow.
He is the Australian equivalent of the best All Black captain ever. Okay, to put it in perspective, that's who he is. In Australia, in winter you have soccer, you have rugby league, you have rugby union, and you have Aussie rules. You have 4 main sports. In summer you have 1, cricket. I would say that cricket is actually the national sport of Australia more than any other sport. Steve Waugh was an incredible player with an incredible record, and at the end of his life, end of his playing career, for some reason someone would actually be with the team. Like a personality would stay with the team for a week just to be around that environment. And Andrew Denton, it's his turn. It was a test series they're playing against England, Australia against England, and it was almost the very end of Steve Waugh's career. And Steve was about to go out to bat in cricket, and he was about like the number 3 or 4 batsman, I think. And for some reason, Andrew said that he was in the tunnel before Steve walked out, and Steve looked at him, and Andrew was like, "I've got to say something. How do I say something to one of Australia's most successful players of all time? He didn't even play the sport. What do I say to him to inspire him?" Or he said, "I can't give him a pep talk. He's been playing for Australia for 19 years. What do I say?" So, cricket has played over a long period of time. And what Andrew came up with a perfect thing to say, in my opinion. He said to him, "I'll see you at the end of the day." Which basically means go out there, don't get out, you're going to be there at the end of the day. That's exactly what he did. He scored a century, which is always the goal when you play cricket, and he actually won the game for Australia that day. He said the perfect thing. I wish I could do that. In 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 16 to 19. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. This is Hannah talking to Eli again. Eli answered, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked him. She said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered him. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. Elkanah comes under a lot of scrutiny because his sons were evil sons, basically. They were trying to, effectively, without realizing it, they were trying to destroy their entire religion. But here, I think this is Eli's greatest moment in his life, and I'll explain why. In 17 words, I had to count them, in 17 words, Hannah went for someone that wasn't eating, was depressed, discouraged, emotional. In 17 words, the words that he chose for her made her eat food and not be downcast anymore.
Let's go.
After being downcast for years and years and years, he said the right thing at the right moment to change her heart. Now, I don't know what has gone on in Hannah's heart. I don't know how God has worked in Hannah's heart. Maybe Hannah sees a different future from his words. Maybe she's resolved, yes, God is in control. I need to be happy with my life. I am loved. I am loved by my husband. I am loved from God. Whatever happens, happens. I don't know the change in her mindset, but something happened at that point that changed her history, and I could argue as well the history of the nation of Israel. She goes home, she gets pregnant, she has a child called Samuel. She keeps him for 4 or 5 years, and then after that she gives him back to Eli to take care of him and look after him and become a priest himself. So let's have a look further down the line about Samuel, her son. This in a way is an epilogue. How important was Hannah's son Samuel to Israel? In Jeremiah 15:1 it says, then the Lord said to me, even if Moses and Samuel were to stand before me, my heart would not go out to this people. God speaks of Samuel here in the same breath as he speaks of Moses. And to an Israelite, Moses was their greatest ever leader. Yeah. And God puts Samuel in the same place as he puts Moses. Samuel was a priest, a prophet, a military leader, their last judge, and he was the man that appointed Israel's first 2 kings. He stands incredibly tall in the biblical Hall of Fame. In 1 Samuel 7:15 it says, Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. He's incredibly influential, and Hannah was his mother. We don't know a lot about her. We don't know her parents, her genealogy, her history, but we know this. We know that without her faith, without her love, without her perseverance, without her righteousness and her example, Israel would not have had one of its greatest ever leaders. Samuel, the Bible tells us, had a great prayer life. When he prayed, God listened to him and God talked back to him. In 1 Samuel 8:21 it says, when Samuel heard that all the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. Samuel had such a great prayer life that God spoke to him personally. And where do you think he learnt that prayer life from? From Eli? No, he would have learnt it from his mother. He stayed with his mother for 4 or 5 years. And what do you think she taught him in those 4 or 5 years? She would have taught him, the one thing I know, Samuel, the one thing I know is if you pray, God will listen to you. I think it would have been her full-time job. She would have told him dozens, if not hundreds of times, that statement. That he himself was the result of prayer. That if anything was ingrained in Samuel's heart, it was that God cared and God listened. And as a result, Samuel trusted God with everything. So the conclusion to this lesson, in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9, a verse we know well, but you, talking to the church, talking to us, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Just as the nation of Israel in the Old Testament times, 3,000 years ago, were called to be a kingdom of priests, Christians today are called to be exactly the same. We're called to walk the hard road. We're called to have a prayer life that moves our hearts and hopefully God's. And we are called to use words that changes the lives of other people. Thank you very much.
Okay, church, we're going to sing the final song. Let's all stand on up.
Come on, Chris.
Final song.